Hi, everybody. For this episode, we're joined by Brad Fulton from California in the United States. Brad is a retired middle school STEMs teacher, but you would never know he's retired. He's busy as a presenter throughout the United States, and he provides affordable professional development for teachers through his internet business. In 2005, Brad was selected as California's Middle School Educator of the Year. I think you'll find him to be humble and super passionate about our young people. Brad, thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thanks for having me, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, and I'm eager to dive in, so let's get going. Brad, you spent 4 decades, literally 40 years, educating our young people. But let's walk through your journey of how you got into this calling. What were your early years like for you?
I hated school. I absolutely hated it.
Really?
I made a vow when I got out of high school that there were certain things I would never do. I would never work with teenagers. I would never become a teacher, and I will never take another math class. So I majored in English, but when I got my degree, I found out no one was hiring authors. And really about the only thing I could do was teach. So I thought, okay, I'll get a teaching credential, but the one thing I won't do is teach middle school. I'll teach the little kids who are sweet and innocent, or I'll teach the big kids who are mature, but not middle school.
Right.
My student teaching was an absolute disaster. I could have quite easily been failed from it, but the teacher, I think, reluctantly passed me, and I got a teaching credential. But I hated it so much that I decided I didn't want to teach, and I went into construction for a few years, and I liked that industry. But 3 days before I got married, the company I worked for went out of business. So I got married with no job, and I thought, construction is you work for 2 months, then you're off for 3 weeks because it's raining, and then you work, and then you're off. And I thought, I need something more stable. So I hit the classified ads and found a job as an aide in special ed at a 9th grade high school, and worked for a wonderful teacher, loved it. Her husband was the principal at an elementary school, and I put in an application there, and he thought that I didn't really fit the job, so he handed my application to a middle school principal without my permission, and I got hired there. So that's how I got into this. And I hated it. I was not good at it. I didn't have classroom control. And every morning before work, I would get physically ill. And that went on for about a year and a half. And I was praying one morning before I went to work and before I got sick. And I said, I didn't want this job. I didn't even seek this job, but here I am. So I'm assuming this is where you want me to be. And in fighting this, I'm fighting you. So God, I surrender, and I'll stay until you tell me it's time to quit. I'm still on contract with my school. I just signed a contract for next year, which will be my 43rd year.
Wow. Well, that's quite a journey into 40 years of service to our young people. Thanks for sharing that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people get into teaching had parents that were educators or other family members. How about in your background? Were there other educators in your family?
No, literally, I got into teaching because with an English degree, there wasn't a lot that I could do. I thought, maybe I'll be a writer, but no one was hiring writers. Newspapers demanded a degree in journalism, which I didn't have. So I thought, really, the only thing I can do with this while I'm waiting for something to happen is to teach English, perhaps at a high school or something. And I did teach English for about 10 years. I had a minor in math. Even though I didn't like math, I minored in it because it was always easy for me. So it was a nice way to pick up credits and keep my GPA high. After 10 years of teaching English, we went through a change in California where our math standards were quite different than the ones I'd grown up with. And there was a lot more creativity in them and a lot more exploration and number sense and things like that. And just seeing the beauty of mathematics, just like an English teacher would see the beauty in literature. And I thought, I might be able to teach math under those terms. So I jumped ship and ended up getting my master's in mathematics education. And I've been in math and STEM ever since.
Got it. When you were young, say like in elementary or early middle school years, did you think at that time you would ever be a teacher or work with young people?
No, I was incredibly introverted as a child. was terrified of groups. So I did not want to be a teacher. And middle school was just a nightmare for me, that the social interactions and things like that. High school wasn't much better. So I really didn't want a job that involved working with people very much. But, I kind of landed there, and I think it was Providence that put me there. And God has worked with me in a lot of ways to make me adapt in those areas that I'm not suited for this kind of work. But now I'm comfortable at it. I can stand in front of students at a school that I go to, or I can stand in front of a crowd of teachers and present, and it doesn't bother me. And that shocks me that it doesn't bother me.
That's interesting. So your education experience was really not all that positive in terms of especially the social aspect of it. It sounds like academically, were you pretty good? I mean, you said math came easy, but
straight A's, yeah. I was the kid where you've heard the phrase, if you had brains, you'd be dangerous. I had brains and I was dangerous. I got straight A's, but I was constantly trying to cause problems and questioning my teachers about everything. And
really
doing sneaky stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what sort of ways were you dangerous? What do you mean? Were you acting out, or were you just kind of like pushing teachers hard to like prove what they're saying is true? Or
I would question stuff and argue with teachers. I tried to get other kids in trouble. I mean, it was like the only way to describe it is a rotten little kid, So
really, and so were you getting disciplined? Did your parents have to get involved? I mean, did it get to that point where teachers were calling your parents, or in teacher conferences, or saying, "Hey, look, Brad's pretty smart, but boy, he's not really paying attention, or he's causing trouble in the classroom"?
It depended on the teacher. My parents weren't lenient. If I did something wrong at home, there were consequences for that. I think that probably more than anything else, it was like if the teacher had good classroom control, I behaved. This was back in the days when you could get SWATs. But if the teacher wasn't good at that, I took advantage of it. And I think it was kind of my way of establishing some kind of control in an environment that I really felt kind of threatened in because of just how introverted and shy I was.
Sure, you could use your brains, it seemed like, to kind of find a way to fit in some sort of way, even though if maybe it wasn't the most positive way, you were leaning on your strength, maybe.
And now when I have a student that's like that, it's like sometimes they ask me if the kids are misbehaved, and they're not as bad as I was at that age. And I'll have a kid sometimes pulling something in class, and they'll go, "Yeah, I remember doing that."
Yeah. So at what point do you think you developed such a deep passion for this? You explained your road into it. Is there a moment in time when you just said, this is good. I really like this. It feels like it fits my skill set. Or was it just a slow, gradual, road into developing a deep passion for helping young people?
I think it was both, Paul. I think that prayer that morning really shifted my perspective and put me on the correct pathway.
Yeah.
Just telling God, I'm going to yield in this, and I will stay until you tell me it's time to go. Because I was literally getting off work every day and buying a newspaper and looking for jobs.
Really?
And then the next morning I'd get sick and go to work again. So that was a huge shift. And at that point, I started to see the kids, and to connect with them. And there were certain, after that, it was kind of a long process, I think. But there were milestones in it. I remember one year I had a class it was literally a math class of about 15 or 20 behavior problems all in one. And these kids' behavior was just off the charts.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with them. It's like they became so dear to me. I've sometimes compared it to, if the Super Bowl's coming and one of the teams can't get there, they're snowed in or something. So you call your local community college to fill in. They're going to get demolished. But man, if they kick a field goal, that's huge. Everybody will erupt. And that's kind of the way it was with these kids. It's like nobody had any expectations for these kids other than, gee, if you can keep them out of the office, that'd be a huge win. But when they would understand something or make a connection, that was like a touchdown. I mean, we cheered. It was great. So I really kind of connect with kids like that.
Yeah. As I was listening to you talk about that, I'm thinking, I wonder if that's because you see a little bit of yourself in those young people, because it sounds like some of them are doing some of the things you did when you were younger.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some sort of connection there? Do you maybe not cognitively aware of it, but do you think that there's, I can relate to those young people maybe?
I think so. And keeping in mind that, I came from a pretty stable family. I had a 2-parent home. My mom was at home. My dad worked. It was a real stable upbringing. And yet I was quite misbehaved in school. And these kids are dealing with issues that are so much more severe than anything I ever even imagined facing when I was their age. I don't know how they hold it together. And to me, they're heroes in a sense, because if they can go through what they're going through and get knocked down and get back up, those are the people I admire most in my life.
Yeah. And when we were getting to know each other a little bit before we started, your show, you were talking about, you made a shift at one point where you don't necessarily teach math or teach a particular topic. You teach kids. Mm-hmm. At what point did you get to that? Because that is a deep level of, I think, awareness about what your role is.
It was that class that I just described. Okay. I was at a traditional middle school. I taught math 5 periods a day, and I had this one class right before lunch that was just behaviorally, they were nightmares. We also had a new administrator that year who wasn't really supportive of teachers, and 2 assistant principals that were brand new and had never held that position before. So if you did send a child up for a behavioral issue, it wasn't handled well and that kind of thing. And I actually thought about leaving education. That was year 14. And, but there's something about this, I would come to work and these kids would misbehave, and between the kids and the administration, my day was miserable. And I thought, why should they be in charge of what kind of day I'm going to have? Mm-hmm. I'm going to start having the kind of day I want to have. So I decided tomorrow when I go to work, I'm going to have a good day. I hope the administration does. I hope the kids do, but I'm going to have a good day. And I stood at the door and greeted the kids as they walked in and talked to them and, patted them on the back and that kind of thing. And I decided, in spite of their behavior, I'm going to live the life that I want to live. And that was kind of a shift again to where I realized I can do this. This is what I'm really passionate about is being in relationship with these kids, positive relationship. And at that school, I had 160 kids a day. And I thought, I want to teach at a smaller school where I can really know these kids. And they were opening a K-8 in my district where 8th grade would be only about 60 students in the whole school for 8th grade. And I would be the math science teacher, and then there'd be a language arts history teacher. And I thought, I'll also have to teach some electives. I'll have a lot more preps, but I will know my kids. And I spent 21 years in that position. And that was just every day. It was a pleasure to go to work and to be with these kids. And they were like my own kids. We were like family.
That ability to choose how your day is going to be really shows a level of your self-awareness and ability to only control what you can control, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that youth workers or teachers or anybody who supports young people has the ability to not confound some of the problems outside of your realm to control, because that's where burnout happens, where you get overwhelmed by some of the situations that young people are going through. Or sometimes it feels like no matter what you do, young people don't make progress. So all you can do is control what you can control. Mm-hmm. And did somebody teach you that, or is that a skill that you've learned over time? Because that's a really important skill for working with young people, I believe.
It was learned over time. The special ed position that I started in my first year, and then the position I got hired into at the middle school of teaching English, I was teaching reading and English to kids that were far below grade level. So these kids had reading issues. And because of that, they did not perform well in language arts and in school in general quite often. And sometimes that led to behavior problems in the classroom for these kids. Sometimes their behavior problem was the reason that they were behind academically. So it was kind of a catch-22. And at first, I took every misbehavior personally. But after spending some time with these kids and learning about them, especially through parent conferences, I realized these kids aren't angry at me quite often. They're just angry. And I would be too if I had to, by the time I got to school, if I had to carry as much baggage as these kids have carried, I'd be angry too.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was, Paul, a realization that this anger isn't towards me. It's just they're growing up in anger, and I could show them a different face than that.
Wow, what a wonderful skill to have, Brad. We're going to take a little short break. When we come back, I want to ask you some more questions about your experience with young people and what you've learned along the way. So we'll be right back. Brad, right before the break, I mentioned I wanted to dive into a little bit more about your lessons that you've learned. And I know you were selected the California Middle School Teacher of the Year. I have to tell you, I think that's a pretty big deal. There's a lot of middle school teachers in the state of California. So to be picked at the top of that list is pretty big. But and I got to believe too, probably you had mentors along the way. You probably are mentors for people now, but did you have a particular mentor or people that you looked up to that you tried to emulate? Or did you really just drive your own lane into what your teaching style was going to be like?
Yeah, I think I'm an amalgamation of a lot of people that I've known. I mean, my senior year of high school, I had the most wonderful English teacher, and that's the reason I became an English major. I mean, he was someone who had a profound effect. I was thinking this morning, what if I had not taken his class? And I was a senior. I didn't have to take his class. It was an AP English class. I had all my credits. I didn't need to take it. And he registered me for his class.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he ask you, or did he just do it?
I was registering for some other class, and he said, "You're going to take AP English next year." And I said, "No, I'm not. I don't need it." And he goes, "I don't care if you need it. You're going to register for it." And I says, "I get to register for my classes." He said, "I will go to the office and tear up your registration and re-register you."
Wow.
And
wow.
Man,
he saw something in you, didn't he?
He drove us hard. And it was he passed away shortly after I got out of high school. I bumped into him my 5th year when I was working on my credential. He was pulling out of a parking lot in the college town I was at, and he almost bumped into me literally with his car. So we talked for a minute. I told him that I was going into teaching English. So I did have that opportunity to tell him that, and he died probably a year or two after that. But there's a lot of people like that. The principal that took my application and handed it to the middle school principal was another real positive influence in my life. He was later the principal at that middle school, so I got to work under him for a number of years. A wonderful man.
Wow. Great story. And now I got to believe, with all your credentials and all your experience, do you mentor other people? Do you help them kind of understand the lessons you've learned along the way? Maybe, I know you do a lot of work with particulars about teaching math, et cetera, but how about this relationship part, the ability to choose how you're going to let your day go? Do you try to share that with other people?
Yeah. The year I retired, the following fall, 2 weeks into it, I was working at our continuation school. I just couldn't stay out of education. So 2 weeks into it, I was working at the middle school and high school teaching science to these kids. And they had a brand new teacher there that was really struggling in handling their behaviors. And she and I talked quite a bit about how to do that. And that's the role I've played in a few people's lives since then, of, talking about how to relate to kids and things like that. Yeah.
All your years of experience, if you're to summarize, what do you think the best thing about working with young people is?
Well, I jokingly say that as a science teacher, my job is to blow stuff up in Act 13. So those are two really big pluses right there. There's so many things, and so many of them connect at such a deep level with what I think my purpose is, that it's hard to really dig down deep and quantify them or just name them. But the intrinsic rewards that you get in education, the kid who said, "You made a difference in my life," that's huge. I mean, they look the same walking out the door as they did walking in. But when you bump into kids years later, one of the things we used to do was, the very first day of school, I gave every child their own inspirational quote. And they would have to say that. If there was a test, I said, one of the questions is, "I want your quote written down." And they got 3 different quotes throughout the year. I bumped into kids who have it tattooed on them. I bumped into kids 10 or 20 years later that can still tell me their quotes and how it affected their life. And the quotes were selected specifically for them. As I got to know them, I would pick a quote that spoke to me about who they are or what their struggle was or how they were overcoming. So, they literally become part of your family. Some of these kids, 30 years later, I'm still connected to them.
Yeah. Really quick, what were some of those inspirational things like? Like, you matter, you're smart. I mean, what were some of those inspirational quotes?
A lot of them had to do with not so much affirmation, because affirmation is good, but if you're depressed, say, and I start just affirming you, it's probably not going to make much difference to you. It's, my opinion of your worth is not as important as your opinion of your worth. Quite often these quotes were about adversity. One of them was, I don't know the author of this one, it might be anonymous, but it was, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for. I shared one the other day with you that the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you'll find out why. So a lot of them were like that, where kids, I'd have a kid as an 8th grade teacher. I'd seen them through the years coming up. Maybe their 6th grade teacher sends them to my room because they're getting sent out of class. So they have to come sit in my room. So I know they've got some behavioral issues. And I'll give them a quote about that. One of them was that I gave to a student was, there's never a better measure of who a man is than what he does when he's absolutely free to choose. And he was often choosing to misbehave in class. And I talked to him about that. He was a 6th grader at the time. I said, you're going to get your quote 2 years early. When I see you tomorrow, you have to know this quote. So when he started 8th grade, he already had his quote. And he still knows it to this day.
That's great. What a great story. And you said that knowing you made a difference, that intrinsic value, that intrinsic reward that you get when you know you've had a moment with a young person that really matters. What would you describe that moment's like? How do you know, Brad, when you have made a difference with a young person? What markers do you look for?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen people go into teaching. The average teaching career pre-COVID was 5 years. Half the teachers quit in the first 5 years. Post-COVID, it's probably less than that. So I've seen a lot of people going into education thinking that's where they need to be, and it's not what they thought at all. For me, the intrinsic reward is, like I said, it's so deep within me. I believe this is my purpose. If I had stayed in construction, I would have been content. I liked construction, but I wouldn't have been fulfilled, because I truly believe that God created me for this purpose, to teach kids in a school, to teach classes at church, things like that. I think he made me a teacher. And I think the characteristics that I had that he put in there were buried for a lot of years. And he slowly unearthed those and brought them out, maybe buried under my introverted nature or something like that, or my defiance. But he unearthed those. And so for me, the rewards I get connect with my purpose. And for some people, that wouldn't be it. Like if I said, the intrinsic rewards of education are overwhelming, and somebody says, well, then I'm going to become a teacher. That might not prove to be as rewarding for them as it is for me.
That's wonderful. What a great story and a great way to look at it. And the fact that you found your purpose and you know your calling in this world is very clear to anybody who would listen to you or seek advice from you or just watch you and the way you work. You have found your calling, and you tried to retire and walk away from it, but you weren't very good at it, were you, Brad? So now you're doing all kinds of other things. You've got this internet-based kind of consulting work going on, and you're keynote speaker for a lot of different conferences throughout the United States. How come it's so hard to just walk away, Brad? Why do you just keep doing it? Why not focus on Brad and some other things you might be interested in?
Well, I jokingly tell people it's because when I retired, I found out my wife won't let me blow stuff up at home. So
you need a classroom to do that.
I have like an 85% survival rate on my science labs. If I quit doing this, I'm no longer connecting to my purpose. I mean, since I've retired, I'm investing more time in teaching at church and things like that, more time in writing. But to sit down on a couch and eat chips and watch Jeopardy doesn't appeal to me. Playing golf does not appeal to me. And during retirement, you ought to be doing the things that you absolutely love. And I love working with kids. My current job is I'm an outdoor ed coordinator and STEM coordinator for the fifth graders in my district, which means I get to go hiking in national parks with my kids. I get to go in their classroom and teach them about volcanoes and the earth and things like that. And I don't have to grade papers or go to meetings. I mean, this is perfect retirement, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what I've always thought about teachers or people who support young people, whether they're mentors or probation officers, whatever they do to support young people, the really good ones, you can't really separate their work from who they are. They are kind of one and the same. It's inherently in them to do this kind of work. Would you say a lot of people that you've worked with over the years had that same level of just their personality was built to teach, whether they're in the classroom or not, they're teaching? Did you see a lot of that, or do you consider yourself to be kind of an outcast in that, rare in that situation?
I think the overwhelming majority of teachers have the same kind of mindset that I do. I work in a wonderful district where they hire people like that. And as I travel around to other districts, occasionally I run into a school that is very depressing, where it's not the kind of school I'd want my kids to go to. But by and large, I think teachers are like this. If you don't come into this career with the right mindset, the kids will drive you out very quickly. So yeah, I see a lot of this. I see teachers that are very passionate about it. There's a phrase that we have: we're not in it for the income, we're in it for the outcome.
I've heard so many conversations about you don't get rich doing this, but I've never heard it put in that simple of a phrase. That's right. That is exactly it. I think that a lot of people share your passion and share those personality attributes that you have, but it takes a lifetime to get good at this. And there's so many moments in time where you could have gone in a different direction. And no matter how you support your young people, you have to be in it for the long run and make that commitment to it. So I just want to say, Brad, thank you for all you've done over the years to help countless young people, and think of the lives that you've impacted along the way. Probably too many to even ponder, but it is just wonderful to have you leading the charge for other people and sharing all the things you've learned and giving that gift to other people. So I wanted to say thank you for all of that, and thank you for being a guest on The Passionate Youth Worker.
Thank you for having me.
Brad, you probably know, before we end the show, I always like to give the guests the last word. So what words of wisdom or inspiration would you like to leave with the listeners?
Years ago, I was at a conference, and a presenter said, I have a program that will improve your state test scores, lower your discipline problems, create a positive school climate. And he went on and listed all these things that this program could accomplish. And he said, it's free. It won't cost you a cent, and you don't need any training. He said, the number one factor in improving education is positive relationships between teachers and students, where students value their teachers and teachers value their students. He said, if you foster that, everything else falls into place. And I really think that's true. I believe that who we teach matters much more than what we teach. And, you can cram for those state test scores and obsess over them and do all the things you want. But if you simply take care of the relationships, the rest falls into place. The school where I worked at is demographically not at the top of our county, and yet our state test scores every year are way up there. Just because we see ourselves, the students, the parents, and the teachers, and the faculty, the administrators, we see ourselves as a family.